My water broke on a Tuesday, alone, on the kitchen floor, and the man who promised to spend his life with me was 3 miles away holding another woman's hand. I didn't know that yet. All I knew was the pain ripping through my lower back, the phone pressed so hard against my ear it left a mark, and 4 rings that turned into voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. A third time, and this time, a text lit up the screen instead of his voice. With Olivia, can't talk RN, just text. I stared at those words on the floor of my own kitchen, contractions rolling through me like waves I couldn't swim out of, and I remember thinking, he'll call back. He has to call back. I typed with shaking thumbs, I think I'm in labor, and sent it into the void. Nothing. Not a bubble. Not a read receipt. Nothing. So I called an ambulance. They put me on hold. On hold, while I gripped the edge of the counter and breathed through pain that felt like my body was tearing itself in half from the inside. In the end, it was my mother who drove me, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, glancing at me every red light like she was afraid I'd disappear if she looked away too long, while my husband sat somewhere I couldn't picture, laughing maybe, with a woman he'd told me was his sister. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without her. Theodore and I had been together 3 years by the time our daughter came. And from the very beginning, there was Olivia. Always Olivia. Dates cancelled because Olivia needed him. Nights he didn't come home because he was sleeping over at her place. In the same bed, he told me, like that was a completely normal thing for grown siblings to do. He called her pet names that made my skin prickle in a way I couldn't explain and didn't want to examine too closely. But I let it slide. I let all of it slide, because Theodore had told me, in a voice that cracked in exactly the right place, that the rest of his family had died in a car accident when he was in his 20s. Olivia was all he had left. And he was Italian, he reminded me. In his family, closeness didn't have edges. I told myself I was lucky he still had someone. I told myself family comes first. I ignored the diamond necklace I caught her wearing after one of their sibling dinners. I thought you wouldn't mind, it obviously looks better on me anyway. I ignored the night she told him she'd seen me flirting with a stranger on the street, when the truth was I'd told a man his shoelace was untied. I sat through dinner after dinner feeling like the third wheel in my own relationship, and I swallowed it every time, because I wanted our daughter to grow up close to her aunt. Her aunt. God. When Theodore finally showed up at the hospital, the next morning, I was still raw from an emergency delivery with complications, stitched and shaking and utterly alone except for my mother. He walked in smiling like nothing had happened. Good morning, my love. I'm so sorry I never saw your text. Then he scooped up our daughter and spun her around the room like a man who had nothing to apologize for. I was too broken, too drained, too in love with the tiny person in that hospital bassinet to fight about it. So I let that slide too. And for a few days after, he was perfect. Heating pad ready before I even winced, lullabies at midnight, hands rubbing the swelling out of my feet without being asked. I remember thinking, this is the man I married. I remember believing it. It didn't last. Within a couple of weeks he was gone again most nights, back in Olivia's orbit, and I was home alone with a newborn and a loneliness so heavy it had a physical weight to it. So one afternoon, desperate for a grown adult conversation, I bundled up my daughter and walked 2 houses down to see Mrs. Rossi, an elderly widow who'd lived on our street her entire life and knew every family in a 5-block radius by name. I sat on her porch and let it all pour out. How I didn't mind Theodore prioritizing his family. How I'd told myself it would get better once the baby came. Olivia walked by. Mrs. Rossi waved her over, the way you'd wave over anyone's sister-in-law. I kept talking, mid-sentence, about how disappointed I was that nothing had changed, and Mrs. Rossi's face drained of every drop of color. Her hand shot out and gripped the porch railing like the ground had tilted underneath her. "That's not his sister," she said. Her voice was shaking. The world went very, very quiet. I actually laughed, a short, confused bark of a laugh, waiting for the punchline. There wasn't one. Mrs. Rossi had known this family her whole life. She knew Olivia's mother. Olivia was an only child. She had no siblings. Never had. And in that single second, standing on a stranger's porch with my baby asleep against my chest, every piece I had refused to look at slammed together into one horrifying picture. The lingering glances across the dinner table. The way she touched his arm just a little too long. The pet names. The bed they shared as siblings. I felt the exact sensation of the floor disappearing beneath my feet, a physical drop in my stomach so sharp I had to sit back down. I called my mother. I don't remember what I said. I just remember she didn't ask a single question. She simply said, "I'm on my way," and 40 minutes later she was in my living room, packing every single item Theodore owned into black garbage bags without a word of protest from me. He came home that night to find his whole life zipped into trash bags on the front step. I told him everything I knew. I watched his face for shame and found none, just the quiet, resigned look of a man who was sorry he'd been caught, not sorry for what he'd done. "Babe," he said, like I was the one overreacting. "She's just a friend." I slapped him so hard my palm stung for an hour. "You will never be allowed near me or our baby again," I told him. "Get out of my face." He smirked. Actually smirked, like I'd told a joke instead of ending our marriage. "You say that like it's a bad thing," he said. My mother physically shoved him off the porch and told him, in words I won't repeat, exactly where he could go. Upstairs, mercifully, our daughter slept through the entire thing.
I thought that was the worst of it. I thought the truth about Olivia was the whole truth. I had no idea. I hadn't even scratched the surface. Because 2 days later, I went back to Mrs. Rossi's porch for answers, and she told me something that made my new rage feel almost quaint compared to what was coming. Theodore's family hadn't died in any car accident. His mother was very much alive. So were 3 aunts, 2 uncles, and a small army of cousins. He had killed off an entire family in a lie, and I was only just beginning to understand why. Grief and rage don't cancel each other out. They just take turns. For days I alternated between sobbing into my daughter's blanket and sitting bolt upright at 3 a.m. with my hands shaking so hard I couldn't hold a glass of water. My mother stayed. She fed the baby when I couldn't lift my arms. She didn't ask me to explain myself, and I loved her for that, because I couldn't have explained it if I tried. Who invents a dead family? Who tells the woman he's marrying that his sister is his sister, when she's been his girlfriend the entire time? I needed answers. And I knew exactly where I wasn't going to get them. So I did the only thing that made sense. I opened our wedding album and started pulling threads. There were cousins in those photos, distant relatives from his mother's side. He'd told me, survivors of the crash. I found one on Facebook, sent a message, asked how he knew Theodore. He wasn't a cousin. He was Theodore's brother, the one who had supposedly died. He had no idea what I was talking about when I mentioned the accident. He told me, plainly, that Theodore had 5 living siblings. 5. I called my best friend, Ree. She showed up within the hour with a bottle of wine and her laptop already open. "We're going full detective mode," she said, and we did. We found his mother's Facebook first, a woman named Susan, gardening photos, book club updates, family gatherings full of smiling faces. Theodore in none of them. Not one. It was like watching someone erase themselves, frame by frame, from their own family history. Then the yearbook photos. There he was, younger, same practice charm, and standing 2 feet away in the cheerleading squad, a year above him. Olivia. They'd known each other since high school. He told me they met in college. I made a fake account and followed her. Her page was public, and I scrolled back 5 years into photos of the 2 of them, real dates, real captions. Date night with my love. 3 years with this handsome man. Then, right around the time Theodore and I got together, the captions shifted overnight. Sibling time. Brother-sister day out. They hadn't broken up when he met me. They had rewritten history in real time, and I had walked straight into the script. My mother took one look at the screen and said 4 words that changed the shape of the next year of my life. "You need a lawyer." Her name was Linda. No nonsense, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who listens to your worst day like she's heard worse. She was blunt with me from the first meeting. Lying to your spouse isn't illegal. Being a monster isn't grounds for anything special. What mattered legally was custody and assets, and conveniently, Theodore hadn't called once about his daughter since the papers went out. Document everything, Linda told me. Every missed call works in our favor. It should have felt like a small win. It didn't feel like anything because that's when things started escalating. Flowers on my doorstep. I miss my girls. Let's talk. No apology. I photographed them in the trash can and sent it without a caption. He called immediately. I didn't answer. I blocked him. Olivia came to my door that night. I didn't open it. I watched her shadow shift through the peephole while she told me, in that same condescending tone I'd heard across 100 dinner tables, that I was overreacting, that they weren't together, that the sister thing was just easier to explain. I recorded every word on my phone with my hand pressed flat against the door to stop it from shaking. Linda filed for a restraining order the next morning. 2 nights later, my new security cameras caught Theodore trying his key in my front door lock at 2 a.m. He spent the night in a cell. That should have been the end of it. It was only the beginning. Unknown numbers started calling. Ring, silence, hang up. Over and over, 10, 15 times a day, until I changed my number just to breathe again. Then the fake accounts bloomed across social media, one after another, accusing me of being unstable, of cheating, of being an unfit mother, tagged to my workplace, my extended family, everyone who might believe it. I printed every screenshot, reported every account. 2 more replaced, each one I got taken down. Then, on a weekend I'll never forget, I walked outside to find all 4 of my tires slashed flat in the driveway. No note. No suspect on camera. Just rubber curling off the rims like the vehicle itself had been attacked personally. The police called it probably random vandalism. I called it a message. A few nights after that, a rock came through my living room window while I was asleep. I remember the sound before I remember moving, glass exploding somewhere behind my head, and then I was already running, baby against my chest, locking us both in the bathroom, dialing 911 with fingers that wouldn't stop trembling. The camera caught nothing but a gloved hand. Could be anyone, the officer said. I packed a bag that night and didn't stop packing until we were somewhere they didn't know to look. My boss let me go remote. I booked a small Airbnb 3 towns over, my mother in tow, and for 1 week it felt like exhaling for the first time in a month. Then the property owner got a call from someone claiming to be me, saying we needed to check out early, a family emergency. My mother had to talk him down at the front door while I stood frozen behind her, understanding with total clarity that they had found us. We left that night for a hotel booked under my mother's name. And in the middle of all of it, the slashed tires, the shattered glass, the fake accounts, the phone calls to nowhere. My phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, and a woman's voice on the other end asked a question that stopped my heart cold. Is this Theodore's wife? I braced for another threat. What I got instead was his mother. The one he'd told me was dead. Her name was Susan, and she wasn't dead. She wasn't even estranged in the way Theodore had described. She was a small, tired-looking woman in her 60s with his exact same dark eyes, and when we sat across from each other in a coffee shop 2 days later, beside me just in case, she told me a version of my husband I hadn't known existed. She hadn't spoken to him in 3 years, she said, not because she disowned him, but because he had cut her off, the whole family, the moment they raised concerns about Olivia. According to Susan, Olivia and Theodore had dated in high school, broken up for college, and Theodore had moved on to a serious relationship with a woman named Casey. 2 years, nearly engaged. Then Olivia transferred to his college. Within a month, Casey was gone and Olivia was back, and things, Susan said, got strange fast. Olivia calling constantly, showing up uninvited at family events, isolating him piece by piece from the people who loved him. When Susan and her husband tried to talk to Theodore about it, he exploded, accused them of trying to ruin his life, and disappeared from theirs completely. She found out about our wedding after the fact. She found out she had a granddaughter from a stranger's Facebook post. Then she slid a folder across the table. Inside were police reports, restraining orders, harassment complaints filed years earlier by Casey, the ex-girlfriend, describing being followed to her workplace, called at all hours, watched. She'd had to move to another state just to make it stop. I was holding a blueprint, the exact playbook, used on someone else, years before it was used on me. Be careful, Susan warned as we left. They won't give up easily. She was right. Someone impersonated me to my Airbnb host within the week. But now I had Linda, I had Susan's folder, and I had an emergency custody hearing on the calendar. The night before court, an email arrived from Theodore. I know where you are. Meet me at the park tomorrow at 9. I forwarded it straight to Linda and didn't sleep, holding my daughter through the dark, listening to a hotel hallway that never stayed quiet long enough. I didn't go to that park. I went to court. Judge Williams had the tired, watchful face of a man who'd heard every excuse in the book. I laid out everything. The fake sister, the fake death, the harassment, the slashed tires, the rock through my window, and my voice only broke once, when I described driving myself to the hospital alone, in labor, because my husband was too busy to notice I was calling. Theodore's lawyer tried to spin it into a misunderstanding, a complicated family, a well-meaning simplification. Then Theodore took the stand and performed grief so convincingly he produced actual tears. Linda took him apart in under an hour. She asked about his mother, disowned 3 years ago, correct? Then produced a birthday card Susan had sent the year before, along with a thank you text he'd sent back. She asked about Olivia, just old friends when he met his wife, correct? Then pulled up screenshots dated 1 week before our first date, unmistakably romantic. He unraveled sentence by sentence. Olivia's testimony was worse. Just friends. No, dating, but broken up. No, never really broken up, and understanding. 3 different stories in 10 minutes. And then Linda called her surprise witness, and Theodore's face went the color of paper when his supposedly dead mother walked into that courtroom and sat down. Susan testified about Casey, about the pattern, about years of behavior that had a name, even if no one in that room wanted to say it out loud. Judge Williams didn't take long. Full custody, mine. Supervised visitation for Theodore, once a month. A restraining order against both of them, extended a full year. The pattern of deception and harassment indicates an unstable situation that is not in the best interest of the child. I nearly went down in my chair with relief. My mother, behind me, let out a sob she'd clearly been holding for weeks. I wish I could tell you it ended there. There were false CPS reports that sent a mortified caseworker to inspect my spotless apartment. A fabricated email to my boss accusing me of theft. A neighbor who mentioned a woman, matching Olivia's description exactly, asking questions around my building under a fake name. Don't think this is over. Theodore hissed at me on the courthouse steps, and for a long time, those 5 words were the last thing I heard before I fell asleep every night. So I made a choice. I packed up my daughter's whole world into boxes and moved 3 hours away, into my mother's small town, and told myself it wasn't running. It was a strategic retreat. It worked. Slowly, agonizingly, it worked. My daughter learned to crawl, then walk, then talk in full sentences, in a house that had never once had a rock thrown through its window. I made friends who'd never heard of Theodore or Olivia. Susan started visiting, carefully, quietly, never revealing where we were, and somewhere along the way, the woman I'd once suspected of being part of the trap became one of the steadiest people in my life. She showed me photo albums of Theodore as a boy, sweet-faced and unremarkable, and said something I've never forgotten. Olivia brought something dark out of him. Or maybe it was always there, and she just gave him permission. A year and a half after we left, Susan told me Theodore and Olivia had finally imploded. Messy, public, ugly. He'd shown up at her apartment drunk, put a window through, threatened her new boyfriend, and earned himself criminal charges of his own. The unknown number that had texted me, "I know where you were," a week earlier, it turned out, hadn't been him at all. It was her, spinning out looking for someone to blame. I braced for a new war. It never came. Olivia moved on to someone else's life to wreck. It's been 5 years now. My daughter starts kindergarten next month, bright and loud and utterly unaware of the storm she was born into. I got married again last year. Small ceremony, close friends, Susan beaming in the front row as her granddaughter threw flower petals down the aisle. Theodore still gets his monthly supervised visits, though he only shows for about half. He's remarried too, and by Susan's account, calmer now, further from Olivia, further from whoever he was when I met him. We're never going to be friends. We don't need to be. We're civil, for her sake, and that's enough. Sometimes I still think about that ordinary afternoon on Mrs. Rossi's porch, how one sentence from a stranger unraveled a lie I might have lived inside forever. If she hadn't said those 5 words, I don't know how long I would have stayed a third wheel in my own marriage, wondering why I was never quite enough. Instead, I'm here, in a house with no cameras pointed at the door anymore, with a husband who answers his phone, and a daughter who will never know how close she came to growing up inside someone else's lie. That's the thing about lies this big. They don't hold. They can't. And when they finally come apart, you get to choose what you build in the wreckage. I chose this.